Yes, thank you, Michelle. That was a great session. So while the NSF program officers are working their way up here, I'm going to just try and recap a few of the highlights from today. There was a lot that was brought up. There was a lot discussed and a lot of content, but I thought I'd just highlight a few of the things. Dean Chang talked a lot about thinking about where you can have impact and where you can't, as well as focusing on all of your stakeholders, which is sort of the term we're using for where you think your social impact can be, who would benefit, who might not, et cetera, and thinking about linking those to value propositions. We heard Jenny Cross give a great talk, really encouraging all of us to think about not just targeting individuals for social change. We might need a few more chairs, Jim, if you could bring a few more up. But also thinking about the different levels of organization. And of course there, the issue is, where are the levers for change? What's impeding whatever it is you would like to see move forward? James Moore talked to us really, I think one way to think about this, he talked a lot about inclusivity as a form of social impact. One way I would think about this is actually elevating the social impact of your project beyond just, say, a new technology that really changes people's lives, to think about, in addition, really increasing inclusivity and really bringing new communities in. So that's sort of an additional one that you could have. Eleanor Powell's talked to us really a lot about the disconnect between the creators and the community of users, and how easy it is for that to happen if you don't use a process where you circle back and you're constantly engaged with those that you think are involved in the social impact side of your project. Now, the hard part, of course, is how to identify the biases that early on in the design process that also could cause unintended consequences, and so that's something I think you just have to think very deeply about. We heard Kara really go over a lot of the work that's been done in the science of team science, and I had explicitly asked her to present some of that because I think it's important to recognize the scholarship in this field, and that the things you're hearing, like the things we just heard from Michelle, are not just something off the top of people's heads. There's been a lot of studies done on this and a great deal of research. Shalini talked to us a lot about the need to engage with not just diverse teams in terms of the experts, but also think about those that potentially have most experienced what the problem is. So a good example might be you're focused on an issue of new water technologies. You know you want to talk to water managers and utility companies, but you probably also want to talk to those water users, particularly in underserved communities. I think one of the key highlights from John Kramer's talk was the value that an enabler or a boundary spanner can have. And I also want to say that it doesn't have to be someone from the outside. John tried to emphasize that. You know, I think there are a lot of scientists, a lot of scholars out there who are just really good at it already, paying attention to when all of their team members are engaged, when people have a good understanding of what their role is and they feel included, versus when that is not the case. And then Michelle went through a fantastic set of things that really, I think, helped link a lot of the research to the practice and what you can actually do. And I think actually one of the points that was made back here by one of the participants is talking the talk is not the same thing as doing. And so it is going to be important to revisit these issues long after you write the proposal, if you get the award, and as you move forward in other kinds of team processes. Okay, so with that, I'm going to close, and I'm going to ask you to introduce each of yourselves, and then one of you, perhaps, Deborah, you want to sort of moderate.
Okay, so Okay, so I'm just going to start by introducing the team of ERC program directors that are here today. Starting down there, this is Junhong Chen, and next to him is Mary Poats. She does REU, RET, but within the EEC division, we have strong cross-integration with all of the engineering education and broadening participation elements. Sitting next to Mary is Sandra Cruz-Pol. She is in the process of joining us as a program director and will be actively engaged in the coming months. Sitting next to her, Denick. And a lot of you were in contact with Dana in preparing for the cohort workshop. And she'll continue to be a resource for you, I think, during the time of your award. Next to Dana is Kathy McLeod, and she's a detailee with us, but she's been, one of the things we do practice is trying to bring program directors in from other directorates. Kathy is in MPS, and just in order to allow us to get a different perspective so that, we're not talking just to ourselves, engineers talking to themselves. Okay, I'm Deborah Jackson. I'm a longstanding program director in the ERC program office. So I have two messages for you before opening it up for questions. The first is that the solicitation will be released during calendar year 2018. You've probably heard that before, but I'm serious. Second point of information is that you do not need to have planning grant in order to apply for the next ERC competition when it comes out. Okay, so we'll take questions. Over there? There's one here and one over there.
Thank you. Can you comment, or does NSF have a stance on the role that international partners and collaborators might play in the planning process as well as an actual ERC proposal? Is that looked favorably upon?
Okay. I think it's on.
It's on? Okay,
Yeah.
Can you hear me? All right, we're not going to comment on anything that might or might not be in the solicitation, but, in general, international activities that make sense within your ideas make sense. How's that for a non-answer? I mean, if it makes sense, you should include it.
So just a question on the, over here to your right, I guess, on the social impact side of things and the team science part of it. Just the question I had asked earlier, which was, does it make sense for us to think about the team science as part of the research agenda in terms of studying how teams come together and adding to that body of scholarship? Or does it make sense for us to simply utilize and I shouldn't say simply because it'll be quite difficult as it is, but to utilize the findings that have already been put forward?
Yeah, I'll give it a try. So for ERCs, up to this point, we have been encouraging the research on engineered systems. So that's the main goal. In addition to the other foundation components, we have been introducing the planning grant, in terms of the ERC model. So the social science or team science or engineering education or culture of inclusion, those aspects we really hope you to employ or take advantage of the best practice, the state of the art of those fields to address your scientific problems you are addressing. And that doesn't mean, you should not do any research in this area, but, we don't, you don't have to have this research in the social science or engineering education or culture of inclusion, per se. And I just wanted to add a comment on the international collaboration. So we want the ERCs to be the best in the world. So try to tap into the expertise globally.
Let me just add one thing. And when we talk about the emphasis on societal impact, it depends on the problem, but there are some problems that it only makes sense to try to address from, a worldview perspective. And so if you're addressing one of those problems, it would make sense to have international collaborations.
And none of this should be considered a prediction of what will be in the solicitation, which is not yet public.
Along those lines, right here. So I understand now that the RFP for the pre-proposals will be issued in calendar year 2018. I think I heard that. Any sense of when the pre-proposals will be due, given that our planning grants have just begun?
So, well, what I can say in response to that is that we were prepared in not having an ideal lineup between the timing of the planning grants and the ERC competitions. This is a pilot activity, so we are trying to learn from this activity and determine if the planning grants are something that the ERC program chooses to continue. It is parallel to the ERC competition, so you don't necessarily need to think of one as a preliminary step to the other. Right.
I have a quick question here. So this morning, I think we heard a couple of different definitions of convergent science. So I wanted to see if you can take a minute or two to just explain what is convergent science according to you. And maybe give an example of past ERCs, because there's several very good ERCs. Maybe give an example of existing ERC, which is effectively implementing this convergent science in a very practical manner. Thank you.
So, so my understanding on the convergence is, I think Michelle did a really great, explanation relating the convergence to other interdisciplinary, multidisciplinary, research. But I think, convergence has two major features. One is it's a deep collaboration among the disciplines. So, which means it's not, integrate other fields than engineering as a afterthought. It has to be integrated from upfront when you design your ERC approach. And the second thing is, you have to address a complex societal problem with the convergence research. So I think those two elements are key to convergence research in comparison with other terminologies. They may evolve in terms of the degree of collaboration. There's another question. Maybe,
for the question about examples of ERCs that what could be considered convergent, I would say that the CASA ERC, which was a weather predicting radar ERC, was very convergent. In particular, they tended to pull in and get feedback from a wide community of stakeholders, including the first responders, and when you have inclement weather, tornadoes, or they were able, as part of their center, to pull in elements from the communities that would need to be, to get the warning out to the public and get feedback in terms of how effective their ability to predict the severe weather incidents was. And so that was one of, that would be one big example. Another one would be a current ERC, which is Pads Up, which is working very closely in the community on new methodologies for addressing chronic diseases. And they have stakeholders in the form of patient participants, lawmakers, you know, the providers, the providers of care for the patients, the research community, some of the businesses that develop some of the components that they would need for data collection. So it's a wide community. So those would be two examples. The ERCs have been headed in the convergent direction, I would say, over the past 10 to 15 years. The more and more the types of centers that we're selecting have some elements of it in them.
Sandra, where did you come from recently?
I come from the University of Puerto Rico in Mayagüez, and I was part of a CASA ERC, so it was a great experience. So, we felt that we did integrate the social component and entrepreneurship and many of the aspects that we're looking forward in an ERC center. So, but I'm new here, so. Yeah. Anyway, best of success to all of you.
I have a question. This is Enrique Gomez from Penn State. So putting the solicitation aside, I think we've been hearing this exciting new vision for ERCs that has been evolving for some time and continues to evolve. But I was wondering, as this vision evolves, what, in your opinion, do you see the role of test beds in this new generation of ERCs might be like? Or perhaps it's not any different, maybe that has not changed.
So we're not going to talk about what's in the solicitation. I'm sorry. You can see what we've done. You know, the role that the test beds have played in the past. But we really can't talk about what we're going to put in the solicitation that's upcoming. Sorry.
Here and then here.
All right, I'm trying to focus the question on just the planning grant. Obviously, the planning grant is something new that really came out from the NAE recommendations and sort of kickstarts this whole process. And for all of us, this is new. We have done planning grants, but not the kind that we are talking about, at least we've involved in today. So what advice would you give for how effectively to use this planning grant to sort of, what would you like to see the teams do in terms of getting a planning grant activities going?
So I'd like to start with, and I'm sure the other program officers have suggestions, is to determine if the ERC is a good fit for where your idea is going. I think we definitely want to build support or build capacity with the planning grants, and we acknowledge that through this process you might find that an ERC is not the best solution or mechanism for supporting where you want to go next. And so I think that's the initial one, is the ERC right based on this? Mm-hmm.
I just wanted to add, the ERC goal, the planning grant goal is to not only, help with the ERC planning, but also build up the capacity for the community. Some of the things you will be discussing during your planning grant activities, such as team formation, is universal to any large-scale research. So I think those are the general models you can adopt for any other center-scale research activities. And I think it's important to have a holistic view, because remember, you have seen the new model for the ERC. We have those 4 foundational components, and we also have this, new emphasis on societal impact, the convergence, team formation, and stakeholder engagement. So you wanted to take a holistic view so that you can, invite the right people into this group and for the right meaningful discussions. So that's what I can offer.
I think the planning grant is an excellent opportunity to really review some of the aspects that are very, very important in order for research to work. It doesn't matter how much expertise you have a great team, but if you realize that you don't work well with each other, if communication skills, all those other human factors that are so important in order to develop good research, there has to be some certain affinity of, I'm an RF person, so the frequencies can be different, but they have to be synchronized in some way so that people really can produce and be more effective. So I think that's the perfect, opportunity for you to evaluate, do I really need this team? Should I add somebody else? Am I missing something? And at the same time, look at the idea and try to develop it better. So it's a great opportunity, so use it.
Over here. Oh. And then the other thing you should understand is that we realize that some of the concepts that are in the planning grant are new. That's the reason why we are using the planning, but it's a direction that NSF is headed in. If you look at the NSF strategic plan, it does, it does predict that we're moving more towards convergent type problems that will address complex societal issues, which in order to really make progress require that more consideration be given to how you form the teams. So the planning grant is our way of seeding the general engineering community with being able to develop a mindset. By just sitting down and trying to participate in the planning grant competition, you start to think about, oh, okay, what is meant by this convergence thing? And what is meant by this team formation thing? And so what we want is for the community to start getting comfortable with these concepts, because that is a direction that you're going to see more and more from throughout NSF, not just the engineering research program.
So I guess to piggyback off of that comment, so one of the points over here, one of the points you articulated is to build capacity, and I think that NSF is beginning to think more along the lines of convergence. And so as these sort of planning grants kick off and the teams start to build momentum, is NSF thinking about other mechanisms other than ERCs, other than sort of the standard sort of collaborative grants that you see in the different units to help sort of maintain the momentum?
So I know that they're not from engineering, but there is a convergence accelerator opportunity that will be, showing up. It's foundation-wide, yes.
All right, so I have two questions. The first one relates to the examples that you brought up about the successful ERCs which are doing convergence. If you look at the topics that they are working on, they're related to things that maybe are also relevant to other agencies. So the question is, how do you draw the line between what is NSF and what is research that could be performed by other agencies, or problems that could be addressed by other agencies? So that's the first question. The second question relates to this workshop. What did you want to achieve? What was the thinking? What was the discussion when you arranged this workshop for the planning grant?
So I'll answer the first part, and I'll let Dana answer the second part. The first part, how do we draw the line? We don't look specifically at other agencies except to see whether, if we're thinking about funding something, whether it's already heavily funded by another agency, and then the level of funding that we might give it may not have much impact. But we just compare the proposals against each other.
So to expand on that a little bit, each agency has its mission, and we cannot fund another agency's mission. It's illegal for us to increase another agency's budget because Congress has given them exactly what they need. Okay, I expected a laugh at that point, but Anyway, but a lot of people can argue about that. But we're well used to setting these lines, and generally we understand where the Department of Energy is, what they fund. There are some overlaps with what we fund. We understand NIH and what they fund. There are some overlaps there as well, but we try very hard not to go over one boundary or the other. That being said, there's fundamental science in almost everywhere. So we are not nearly as mission, I mean, we have a mission to fund fundamental science and engineering. We don't have as specific a mission as, say, NIH, which is focused on human health. So we make those decisions kind of on an ad hoc basis, depending on what we're presented with, but we would assume that you're not going to send us something that belongs, example, if it's satellites in space, then I'm pretty sure it's not us. I'm pretty sure that ground-based is NSF and satellite-based is NASA, for example. But we're used to dealing with that. If you have any questions, you can always ask either us or the other agency to see what's what. I forgot the second half of the question.
That's okay. I can speak a little to the second half of the question, the purpose of the workshop. And so I think all of you have seen in the reviews that you got back from the planning grant reviews that this was actually not only a new and interesting activity for you to submit proposals to, but it was also a new activity for us to manage the review of. So we were looking at some of the ideation around the ERC concept, looking at some of the strategies that people came with towards the stakeholder engagement and team formation. And it was, we recognized that what we're really trying to do is push on the culture of how center-based engineering research is done. And so we created this workshop or worked with ASEE and SESYNC to think about what are some of the resources and tools that you can augment your planning grants with that can maybe push you to think of, you had one way of thinking about team formation, but there might be many, there's bodies of research on all of these ideas. And so we really, kind of wanted to take a fire hose approach and throw a lot of information at everybody. But it was really intended to provide some resources that you can turn back to later. And on a more selfish point, you are our pilot cohort, so it's a little bit of experimentation on the policy side. We want to try to figure out what this does and help us determine if this is a useful way, using the planning grants, using the workshop, of kind of stimulating the potential ERC community.
Can I just interrupt or just backtrack just a little bit? I am on detail from MPS, so I have less experience with the engineering directorate as other people do. There may well be things that you put on satellites for engineering, but from the physics and astronomy perspective, that would not be us. But don't take my word for it.
Okay, this is our final question for the evening.
Perfect. I was going to squeeze in two parts to it. It's really two different questions. The first question, I'm not going to ask you about the solicitation, but I am going to ask you something about history or past. It's related to test beds, and so I wonder if you can say anything about what you think has worked or has not worked with respect to test beds, or if you can point to any, like you did for convergence, that you think are best-in-class examples of it. So that's my first question. My second question, really unrelated, can you talk at all about the process? Have you done any thinking about the process for selecting ERCs?
I would say that as far as test beds, we put a strong emphasis on that during the post-award oversight process, because for us it's really important for the students to have a hands-on access as a way of learning. So I would say almost all of the ERCs that graduated have test beds that are of quality.
I've only been with the ERC program for a short amount of time, but what I've seen so far has led me to the conclusion that The successful centers are responsive in their testbed designs because over the life of the center, conditions may change. Some of the centers have found their economic markets completely turned upside down, and so they've had to reposition what their testbeds are looking at, what their competitive edge is within the state of the art in the marketplace. And so starting from the beginning of a design for flexibility or adaptability seems to be something that's successful.
I just wanted to add, testbeds, for the current centers, they are playing a critical role in their center mission because, you want to test out your early stage ideas to see if they're working or not in the, close to real life situation. In that sense, it's important to understand the goal of your test bed. What are the performance metrics, right? You wanted to accomplish. Those has to be, you can talk to your potential stakeholders to understand those. So that's what I can comment on.
Thank you, everyone, so much. This was a great first day to this workshop. We are going to join ourselves. Please join us in. Yes, thank you. Before we join in the atrium for a reception, I also wanted to encourage you all to write down any questions, notes, feedback, comments that you had for us. We are going to be disseminating a post-workshop survey to get your thoughts on the design of the workshop and what you've enjoyed learning. So just something to keep in mind. And thank you once again.